Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. To start off with some introductions, my name is Chris Hoffman from FuelCycle, where I am a Director of Customer Experience. Part of my role is really focusing on the strategic relationship with some of our very high-value business partners, really focused on partnerships and strategy, and happy to be sharing the stage with one of our great client partners, my friend Amy.
Thank you, and I am Amy Santapietro. I am the Director of Consumer Insights and Market Research at Mass General Brigham. So I know a lot of you in here. Typically, I would say, give me a show of hands if you've heard of Mass General Brigham. Okay, put your hand down if you live in New England. So Mass General Brigham is the largest healthcare system in New England. But the reason many people haven't heard of it is that we've actually only been in market as Mass General Brigham for about 5 years. Prior to that, it was known as Partners Healthcare, and Partners Healthcare operated each of its entity hospitals very independently, so more like a holding company, where Massachusetts General Hospital did their thing over here, Brigham and Women's Hospital did their thing over here, and there was not a lot of integration across any of the hospitals in the system. However, we do have 5 academic medical centers. That's a fancy way of saying a teaching hospital where research takes place. We have other community hospitals, and we have urgent cares and walk-in clinics all over eastern Massachusetts, southern New Hampshire, southern Maine, and northern Rhode Island. We also have 82,000 employees in that area, which makes us the largest employer in New England. Now, as I mentioned, I am the head of Consumer Insights and Market Research, or the Director of Market Research at Mass General Brigham. And I mentioned that we have 82,000 employees. Our market research team sits at 3. So we have a big job for a very large corporation. And we roll up through our marketing department, as many consumer insights teams do. And so we do a lot of our work with our marketing partners. But we also operate somewhat like a little consulting firm within the organization. And we take any questions having to do with consumer or patient needs outside of the clinical space or medical research. And we try and bring that patient or consumer input to the forefront. So we do a lot of work with our digital patient experience partners, with our patient experience team, with business development and strategy. We're doing a project right now with our international marketing team. We just finished one with our health equity team. So we're taking a lot of different types of questions that require a lot of different types of methodologies to answer at virtually every moment of every day. And so we needed a partner who could help us be incredibly nimble and flexible and answer a lot of different types of questions quickly without fully tapping the 3 people that sit on my team.
So, kind of the answer to being a limited, small team, enter the community space, enter FuelCycle. Together, we've helped build an amazing patient community called Patient Voice. Couple key stats here. Founded in 2019, migrated over to FuelCycle in 2023. From a community size perspective, more than 4,500 members. At FuelCycle, we do a lot of communities. This is one of the larger communities that we support. Super helpful audience. We'll dive into the importance of audience, the ability to even find very specialized, unique, niche audiences within this 4,500. Amazing participation, 80% and higher. When we look across our communities, very, very impressive engagement performance. So a little bit more detail in terms of how it started. CRM recruited. That's really important as it really allows us to verify that audience. So when Amy's small team is doing research, she knows that it's based on a validated audience where she can trust the respondents. Something that's incredibly important and one of my favorite things about this community, 0 monetary incentives. You hear so much about gift cards and participation points across the community space. We'll get more into this, but this is really driven by the member experience, the value, the sharing of feedback, the building of trust between Amy's team in FuelCycle and our community members. It's also serving both English and Spanish language speakers, and we'll kind of get into some of the things that we learned there. And from the FuelCycle side, one of the things that we really wanted to bring to the table for Amy and her team to strengthen the relationship, exposure to the ability to run more advanced analytics, the ability to go beyond the community if needed, to recruit non-patients, to really kind of get that more holistic view to support her research team. And again, really providing her that infrastructure so that her small but mighty team can serve her massive organization.
So I'm not going to go through all of the examples on this slide. The main takeaway here is that we use our community for a number of different types of questions. And as I mentioned, from a lot of different teams and different needs across the organization. In terms of access and navigation, we recently did a study with our digital patient experience team. They were testing new digital means of triaging in the ER. So if anyone's ever been to an ER in the last, say, couple of years, it's not a fun experience. You could be there for hours. And we were testing a way to make it better for our patients. We do a lot in the perception and experience space. One of my favorite studies that we did recently that almost didn't get fielded was around vaccine perceptions. And the reason it almost didn't get fielded was because there were so many internal roadblocks to that study because some of our clinical partners were afraid of the questions that it might raise. But it actually ended up bringing back a lot of valuable insight that we were able to take back to our patient experience team and external comms partners in terms of what types of questions our patients were asking. That one was also really fun. We had to shut down our comments section. That one, our patients got a little spicy. And so if you want to ask me about that over cocktail at some point, I will give you more information. I'm going to skip over the communication bucket for a minute because we're going to share some case studies that go into that one in a little bit more depth. But another way that we've been able to use this community is identify cohorts within the broader community of people who suffer from various conditions or disease states. So we have a cohort of patients and of cancer patients, survivors, and family members of cancer patients in our community that we can tap into. We have a cohort of people with neurological conditions. We have a cohort of people who've actually raised their hands and say they've suffered from mental health conditions and want to talk about that experience. So we're able to utilize the panel in a deep way as well as in broader breadth.
So we mentioned no monetary incentives. The way that we kind of think about how it works is an exchange of value or the value exchange. So no money ever. I'm going to keep harping on that just because I love it. Participation driven by purpose. I think that's a really fantastic tagline for the room to think about. You think about the brands that you like, the organizations that you're a part of that you really trust. Purpose-driven insights, purpose-driven conversations are really fruitful and have a tremendous amount of impact. Trust over transactions, another tagline I love. What we've built here is an organic relationship, not a purchased relationship. So because of this organic relationship, we have engaged respondents. They're really talking, sharing their insights and feedback from an emotional perspective. You have that deep relationship that you just wouldn't get if you're just paying recruitment and you're paying participation incentives. Because the members here are part of a healthcare system, they do tend to be older. And we see, when we look across the panel space, community space, yes, we get a lot of older respondents. These ones are extremely engaged and have been extremely engaged for years. That kind of bucks the trend from what we see in other communities. The question is why? Why has it been so successful for a couple of years? I mean, the big reason is because we've built this two-way street, this relationship where we're sharing feedback, and the patients are getting a tremendous amount of value from the relationship.
That's right. And that's the difference, I think, between having a community versus having a panel. We use a lot of panels, transparently. I'm sure a lot of you use consumer panels for a number of different questions. This is different in that we've created a community with our patients. Actually, when we onboarded with you back in 2023, one of the first things that we did in the first few months of that community was do a member satisfaction survey to understand why our community members were in the panel, what had brought them there in the first place, then why did they decide to stay, and then what could we do better in terms of creating an engaging space for them. And what we heard overwhelmingly was that they joined because they had a deep connection to the system. They are invested in its success. They want to see it continue to improve. But what we were not doing necessarily was sharing back the results of their feedback. this is not a collection of folks who just are getting their opinion out there to get it out there and potentially get a gift card to Target if you do enough surveys. This is a group of people who actually want to see their opinions make a difference. And so that's actually something that we've started working on with the team as we do quarterly newsletters now. If we get some really interesting insights, we'll just put up a slide into our community or send an email saying, we asked you this, you told us this, and then we went and we did this, which has really created a nice, as Chris mentioned, two-way street between us and our community members.
This was a really unique and I think illustrative use case of the community and how the community feedback can be used to change the conversation. So what we were looking at here was a situation where medical experts were kind of describing various aspects of Mass General Brigham with clinical jargon. I'm engaged to a lawyer. She talks to me in legal jargon every day. I have no idea what she's talking about, so I think people can kind of relate to that. But for her, she's assuming, oh, everybody understands what I'm saying. We were seeing something similar here. So when you think of department names, content on the website, in that very very kind of clinical jargon vernacular. So we leveraged the community to kind of unpack some of this. A variety of naming studies, language studies, communication, positioning. The purpose of this was we really wanted to understand from the patients how they're describing their experience, how they're seeing and describing the various aspects of Mass General Brigham.
Yeah, so this question came to us because as our system is integrating, and I mentioned that in the before times of Partners Healthcare, each hospital kind of ran itself as an independent entity. As we're bringing the clinical operations together, we need to name them something. And that sounds very simple, but we're all insights professionals. We know that it's not that simple when deciding on a name. At the time, we had the Corrigan Heart Center at MGH, and we had the Brigham Cardiac and Cardiac Surgery Care Unit. They do the same thing, roughly, but their names vary differently. And how they show up on a site, the perceptions that come with that language is very different. And so we wanted to put different types of names in front of our patients to understand not only what do they understand, but what's compelling, what's a good fit with Mass General Brigham, and where are they likely to go for their care. And so the learnings that came out of it were really interesting. The first is that there is general understanding of some clinical names. Most people do know what cardiology means. Most people know what pulmonology means, that refers to lungs. When you get off, though, the more common body parts, the gap in awareness and understanding drops pretty considerably. Almost nobody knows what nephrology means. In fairness, I don't think I knew what nephrology meant before starting at Mass General Brigham. Another interesting insight was that there was a difference between our community of patients and non-patients. And this is an example where we were able to leverage non-patient sample to broaden our reach and make sure we were getting a holistic understanding of the true consumer landscape. Because at Mass General Brigham, we're not only marketing and we're not only talking to our existing patients. We want to go out and make sure that anybody who needs that type of care can find us and can understand what they're looking for, what they're getting. So there was a big gap between, again, our patients who, as Chris mentioned, are very engaged in their healthcare. If you're going to join a community for a healthcare system that has no monetary incentive, chances are you're more engaged in healthcare than the average bear. But when we compared those results to non-patients, we saw a large gap there in understanding. There was also a gap between understanding and then what people search for. So again, people might know what cardiology means, but they search for heart, or they search for shoulder pain, or they search for a lot of different things. And so when we put all of this information in front of our clinical leaders, we're able to inform a much more patient-centered decision about how to show up in an integrated way that would reach everybody in our market. So this next example is one of my favorites because it proved me wrong. Now, I'm wrong all the time, but I was really wrong on this one. Does anybody here know what gene and cell therapy is? Or could you explain it to somebody? Because that's the trick, right? So gene and cell therapy is a game changer in medicine. It can and will, as it continues to advance, eliminate a lot of genetic disorders. It's going to cure types of cancer. It's going to cure things like sickle cell anemia, which is already being proven to do in trials. It's truly going to change the way we think about both genetic diseases and birth defects and progressive diseases as people continue to age. The problem is that nobody understands it. And again, we're all researchers here. You all know that if you can't get your target to understand what you're talking about and to understand what's in it for them, they are not going to care about it at all. So we needed a way to make people care about this thing that truly is worth caring about. So this came down to two definitions, as the first step is defining it. And this top definition is the one that we all thought was going to win. Both definitions talk about altering genes or cells with targeted replacements to stop disease progression. They both talk about how it replaces or repairs cells. The difference between option 1 and option 2 is that the bottom definition uses words like faulty and defective. And we as insights professionals thought, no one's going to want to think about themselves as faulty or defective. We're going to get a lot of pushback on that. When in fact, defective and faulty genes were actually the words that our patients liked the most in that second definition. And when we started digging into the open-ended comments, we realized that it was because if your genes are not faulty or defective, why are you editing them? Why are you taking them out of my body and replacing them? And when we explained to people why we were doing what we were doing, it took us out of that like mad science-y space, and it turned the conversation into, oh, we're doing this because it is going to change your life. It's going to change something and make you able to live a healthy life. Using that language, that somewhat provocative language, gave us permission to then talk about the treatments, which is a really interesting finding for us. This next example, and I promise it's the last example I'm going to share, is another one we did around with our Gene and Cell Therapy Institute. And as part of making people care about it, we made a video. And so we were going to put this video on our website. It was going to run on YouTube. It was going to run on a number of different places. I think we had a deal with the New York Times. And this was an early version of the script. And again, I'm not going to read it word for word, but it's a lot about us. We talk about ourselves a lot in this language. At Mass General Brigham, innovators lead and discover. They aim tirelessly for progress. Innovators are the masters of unlocking potential. What does that even mean? It doesn't actually mean anything, and anyone could use that sentence to describe literally any product anywhere. Again, we weren't getting to what does this matter to the patient. So we put the script in front of patients. And we use a highlighter tool. It's fairly typical, but we use it a lot in our community. And our patients love the opportunity to really redline something. And the words that resonated the most, which are over here on the left, were, again, the things that tapped into, why are you doing this in the first place? Like, what's in this for me? So language like harnessing the power of targeted treatments to slow or stop disease progression, revolutionizing the way we combat devastating diseases, transforming the fight against cancer, solve some of our most challenging medical conditions like cancer, neurological disorders, and genetic disease. Okay, now we've got people hooked. Now they understand what's in it for them. The areas where they pushed back were some of that flowery language I talked about. Again, they did not like innovators are the masters of unlocking potential. Shocking. They did not like in search of something greater. Again, shocking. Because that doesn't mean anything to them. That's just us patting ourselves on the back. And so we took all of this insight and we wrote up a nice summary. We brought it to our clinical leaders, and they understood what we were explaining, that we needed to infuse a patient benefit into the final product. And if the video plays, we're going to see where we landed.
At Mass General Brigham, innovators discover and lead in search of something greater, a cure. We are the Gene and Cell Therapy Institute. More than 400 researchers and doctors. Innovators transforming how we treat devastating diseases. Our mission? Develop and deliver new gene and cell therapies. Today, Mass General Brigham provides FDA-approved treatments for conditions like cancer, inherited genetic disorders, and neurological disease, offering first-of-their-kind clinical trials focused on improving the lives of patients now and in the future. Our goal? Create a better tomorrow by taking on the most challenging medical conditions, pursuing new discoveries using advances in gene editing, RNA medicines, and CAR T therapy, ultimately revolutionizing medicine. We are the Gene and Cell Therapy Institute at Mass General Brigham. Together, we can shape the future of medicine.
So there were still a lot of big words in there, but it did. We really were able to bring it more onto the patient, and we were really pleased with the blend we were able to get.
Amen.
There we go.
Oh, there we go. Well, I feel inspired. Thank you for sharing that. That's a great story, a great use case of the community. So, yeah, that's fantastic. Another thing that I think is emblematic of a good partnership is the willingness to try things together. And sometimes it's market research, things go wrong. Through our partnership with Amy, we've tried a lot of things, and some things haven't gone as expected. I have a couple interesting examples. One, when we think of the notion of on-camera UX testing, talked to dozens of people about this over the last couple of days. When we think of the audience that we have in the community, especially the fact that they're older and the fact that they're healthcare patients, interesting learning. A lot of these community members, they did not want to talk about their healthcare on camera. Makes a lot of sense. Very, very strong aversion. That's fine. Quick little pivot. FeelCycle has a really robust research tool ecosystem, so we switched to a different approach on moderated qualitative formats. Just still got some amazing data, just had to switch up the methodology. So great learning, which makes us better going forward. Engagement experimentation. We work with a ton of communities at FeelCycle. We think of, badges, gamification, all these fun ways to incentivize and engage members, really drive that participation. We tried it here, and they said, we're good, no thanks. Really didn't resonate at all. So again, really interesting learning, for us as we look to the future of the community. It goes back to what we were talking about from the value exchange perspective, right? The patients really believe in the mission behind Mass General Brigham. They want their voice to be heard. That's more important than money. It's more important than badges or playing games. So again, I think it's a lot of credit to your team, Amy, for really just being appreciative of the patients and their feedback since the implementation of this community. A couple other interesting learnings. Building a Spanish-speaking community can be difficult. A lot of times we go digital recruitment first because it tends to be cheaper, or the cheapest and in theory the easiest to pull off. The less time intensive. Didn't really work for this community. So one of the things that we kind of figured out from a best practice perspective, meeting the audience where they are, and that can be applied not just for this audience, but really across audiences. In-person recruiting, really, really important. Community outreach, especially for a hospital system that's based on region, much more important and impactful than going digital recruitment first. And then lastly, kind of in the AI perception space, and again, just kind of, reminder that on average, the members of this community, tend to be a little bit older, very distrustful of AI, which is not necessarily surprising, but they're kind of using it without really knowing that they were using it. So, the value that we kind of uncovered here was the ability to help Mass General Brigham really kind of understand where that gap is and then close it. So again, going back to the experience that the community members have in this environment, the value of the feedback. It's okay to try, but it's even better to try and learn.
So our takeaways, I think the first one is that scale does not have to mean slow. We do a lot of different studies over the course of the year, and I think one of the biggest benefits to us of having this community at our fingertips is we can put something into the community on a Monday and we can get over 1,000 responses by Wednesday. And there's just not a lot of other options for research that enable us to get that level of scale and patient feedback that quickly to help inform decisions. We all know that ideally researchers get brought into the process super early, but in reality, does that really ever happen? Sometimes you're brought in at the very last minute, and sometimes I almost think they just kind of tell us so that we would say, oh no, we don't have time to do that, and then they can move on with whatever decision they want to make. But we can actually do it with this community, which is amazing. And then the next thing is just, we really do strive to meet our patients where they are. Chris mentioned the Spanish recruitment via digital means that did not really work well for us. It's very tricky. And so over the course of a few months, we actually partnered with our health equity team to put up posters with QR codes to join our community in healthcare centers across the greater Boston area that skew more African American or more Hispanic, to not only get more people into our community, but start seeding that idea of providing feedback. And so that's been a slow drip of responses, but we have seen some uptake for us because we went to where they were and we're already there.
And lastly, 10, 15 years ago, I was working for a really large media company, and the CEO of the company loved to get in the elevator with me because he would talk to me about all of his hypotheses and have all these questions, and he would want the answers right then and there. Back then, didn't have a community. Okay, yeah, I can get to this in 6 weeks, 10 weeks, I don't know, let me get back to you, right? We didn't have anything that was always on. So I think given the needs that Amy and Metro Brigham have had, is a lot of value in just research, being able to access your audience, being able to dive into and segment your audience at your fingertips, click of a button, maybe a click of a couple buttons, but it's really always accessible. We work very, very closely with your team, and we love it. And then again, when we think about the audience, we know that it's built on trust. We know that we're going to get great results. We're going to get great insights. It's going to be organic feedback. This is really a success story among the Fuel Cycle communities. And Amy, thank you for being a great partner.
Thank you. I think we have a few minutes for questions. I'm not getting the get out yet. Right, go ahead.
I think the Spanish community is a great example of deliberately building diversity into what you're trying to do. So credit to you for creating a highly engaging, trust-based, zero-incentive patient community, but by its very nature self-selecting. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there are elements of your wider community that are not represented there. They may be lower income, lower education, ethnic, whatever. So are there other communities, other diverse communities that you've consciously built outside the community to try and improve, as you said, Spanish Americans? Are there people that don't fit into that mold that you're able to reach differently?
Yeah, so the question is, how do we go after diverse patients who may not be the types to willingly join an online community? And it's a really good question, and one that we're continuously trying to improve. First of all, we know that our community, and you're right, it does not reflect our patient base. It skews older, it skews white, it skews female, like a lot of consumer panels. And we've done a lot of work to identify where some of the largest gaps are and try and go out and intentionally close those gaps. But we also recognize that, to your point, email is not the way to do it with those audiences. And that's where our partnerships across the organization come in. So we do work with our health equity team a lot. We have a team of people in the system we call them the DACs, but they're digital access coordinators, and they physically sit in different clinics across the system with iPads. It's usually to help patients make sure that they can check in to their appointments, that they can fill out their paperwork as necessary, that they can fill out their screenings, to schedule their next appointments. But we've also been able to tap into that group to ask questions here and there to ensure that we're getting their feedback in some capacity, because it is hard. Go ahead. No, you.
How has the institution reacted to having this asset, and have your relationships with your partner teams changed in any way?
So it's been a huge boon and drive and credibility for our market research team for sure. But we had to do it correctly. We had to partner in the right people at the outset. So before we launched any community, we partnered with our business development and strategy team, and we partnered with our patient experience team. Once we had explained what this could do for them and they were okay with it, they actually helped us RFP back in, this is before my time actually, this was in 2019 when we were launching any community. But we needed to get those people on board before we could do anything else. And then today, we partner in with them whenever we're doing and specifically our patient experience team, whenever we're doing a large recruitment, so that they're aware of it. We get a lot of patients who will forward our emails to our chief medical officer and say, is this spam? And so they need to be aware of what we're doing and, what the left hand knowing what the right hand is doing. And so I would say partnering in early and often has been our key to success there. But now they use it all the time. It's funny because the flip side of that is we're always excited to tell different teams around the organization that we have this community of patients, but then we know that about 15 minutes after that meeting ends, we're going to get an email about, okay, so I want to do this study and I want to ask this question and can we launch this thing? So, but that's exciting too.
All right, well, thank you all for attending. Really appreciate it.